So what we're going to do, we're going to use a couple of triangles. You have seen these before in geometry. We need to bring them back, some of their properties. These are very helpful triangles, allowing you to do a lot of things with specific trig angles, okay? You've heard of a 30, 60, 90 triangle, yes? Okay, that was the feedback from the class, or a 45, 45 triangle, okay? The reason these are both right triangles because 30 and 60, that's 90, plus the 90 you see down here, that's 180. Same thing, 45, 45, and 90, okay? I would not be concerned about these sides. This is what you really need to know right here, okay? So you're going to see these two triangles. This is one question on your quiz. You know, I will give you the triangle and you have to fill in, you know, if I give you these angles, you fill in what the sides are. Okay, so if the, what is this side called over here? The hypotenuse. So if the hypotenuse is 1, okay, in both cases we can construct a 30, 60 or a 45 triangle. The way I always remember a 30, 60 is I look at the 30-degree angle. The side that is opposite 30 is 1/2 of the hypotenuse. What's 1/2 of 1? 1/2, okay? So wherever the 30-degree angle is, go to the opposite side. That side is going to be 1/2, okay? And then I look for the other side, I just multiply by the square root of 3, okay? So 1/2 times the square root of 3, that's the square root of 3 over 2. That's how I will memorize a 30, 60, 90 triangle with a hypotenuse of 1. With a 45-degree triangle, if the hypotenuse is 1, both the sides are square root of 2 over 2, okay? So this is, like I said, this is a question on your quiz. You know, this is the review from last year. Like, that's what this question looks like. You have to fill this in. Now, what happens if you fill this in wrong? What do you think happens for the rest of the quiz? You're going to get wrong answers because you're going to need these things in order to do the assignment. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. You'll need to know that, and like I said, the way I always do it, whatever side is opposite 30 is 1/2 of the hypotenuse. And then to get the other side is multiply by square root of 3. And then in this one, they're both square root of 2 over 2. So let's use that. Now, what we're also going to need to remember, we're building on the trig. You've got to know all of the sine, cosine, tangent, all the trig functions we knew before. So remember we had an acronym, SOHCAHTOA, which tells me the sine is the opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, okay? What was the reciprocal function of sine? It's also written up here. Sine goes with which one? Cosecant. Cosine goes with which one? Secant. And tangent goes with cotangent. So the cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite, okay? So hypotenuse over opposite. Hypotenuse over adjacent. Adjacent over opposite, okay? These are just the reciprocal functions. So you've got to know this, okay? And this is something we learned when we started out in the unit, okay? So let's put some of these things together. Now, this is also a quiz that you would do without your TI Inspire, okay? So it's not that hard, guys. Find the value of the secant of 30 degrees without your TI Inspire. Now, what we're going to do, the key to all of these is to construct a right triangle. So where is 30 degrees? If I start at 0, which way do I go? I go up. So it's going to be something like this, okay? That's going to be 30 degrees, okay? Now, I can make that into a right triangle, okay? If I make that into a right triangle, what is this angle up here at the top? 60. Have we learned anything about a 30-60 triangle? Think back to maybe 2 minutes ago, okay? If the hypotenuse is 1, how do I write down the value of the other sides of a 30-60? Yeah, opposite the 30 is going to be 1/2, and then the other side will be multiply that by the square root of 3. Okay. So now I've got a triangle. So if I want to figure out the secant of 30 degrees, okay, the secant of 30 degrees is 1 over which trig function? What's the reciprocal of secant? Secant goes with cosine. So it's going to be 1 over the cosine of 30. Okay? So, or the other way of doing it, if the cosine is what? Adjacent over hypotenuse, what's the secant? It's hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay? So if you look at this triangle, what is hypotenuse over adjacent? 1 divided by what? Okay, what's adjacent to 30 degrees? Square root of 3 over 2. So 1 over the square root of 3 over 2. How do you handle when you've got 1 over a fraction? So 1 over a over b. What is that? I didn't expect it to be that tricky, but no. 1 over a fraction like this. This should just be this, okay? Do you not see this? No. Okay, this is Algebra 1 stuff. This is way before spring break, okay? So when you're dividing by something the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. So 1 over a over b is the same as 1 times b over a. Multiplying by reciprocal, if I'm multiplying by a number, that's the same as dividing by its reciprocal. So this is just b over a, okay? So the answer here, this is just 2 divided by the square root of 3. Okay. I'm going to pause here for a second. Someone tell me, what is the sine of 30? Look at that triangle. What's the definition of sine? Opposite over hypotenuse. What's the sine of 30 degrees? What is it? 1/2 divided by 1. What's 1/2 divided by 1? What, any number divided by 1? Yeah. 1/2 divided by 1 is 1/2, okay? We're regressing, guys. The problems are getting easier, but the answers are stumping you more. When are you going? What is the sine of 60? Look at this. What's the sine of 60? Divided by 1. So square root of 3 over 2, okay? What is the tangent of, how would I find the tangent of 30? That's 1/2 divided by square root of 3 over 2, okay? So you're going to use these special right triangles to go back to just like we had on quiz 1, where we would just figure out, looking at a triangle and figure out what the trig values are, okay? So all I did here was I drew 30 degrees, constructed a right triangle, used what I know about special right triangles to figure out the exact sine of 30 degrees or secant or anything without using a calculator, okay? So let's have some more practice with those. Now, before we do that, let's talk about what these triangles are going to look like when the angles end up in different areas, okay? Suppose this triangle ends up in the first quadrant, okay? So this is my x-axis, this is my y-axis, okay? So to go from here to get to where this right angle is, these x values are what over here? Positive or negative? Yeah, so the x values are positive. What are the y values up here? Yeah, so think about this point right here. To get to that point, I had to go positive x and positive y, okay? So when I draw that triangle, I'm going to have positive values for both legs of the triangle. The hypotenuse is always going to be a positive. It's a distance, okay? Now, let's see if this triangle lived in quadrant 2, okay? So if I was looking at this point right here, here's my x-axis and my y-axis. To get from here over to here, in the x value, what direction do I have to travel? Positive or negative? I have to go negative in the x, and to get to this point, where do I have to go in y values? Positive or negative? Positive. Okay, so when I draw a triangle that's in the second quadrant, it's going to have a negative x value, positive y value. Okay, let's continue on. If I have a triangle that ends up in the third quadrant, so a triangle that looks like this, and your right angle is always here on the x-axis. There's my x value, my y value. If I'm trying to get to this point right here, in the x direction, do I travel positive or negative? To go from here to here. I go negative in the x direction. And then what about the y direction? Do I travel positive or negative? I travel negative. Okay, so when I draw a triangle in this quadrant, instead of 1/2 and square root of 3 over 2, it's going to be negative 1/2, negative square root of 3 over 2. If I go to the fourth quadrant, and I'm going from, here's x, y, to get from the origin to this point right here, I travel in the x in what direction, positive or negative? To get from here to here, in x, I have to go positive direction in x, and what direction in y? A negative direction in y. Okay? So you don't have to memorize this, but you just have to be able to look at the coordinate system and know, hey, when I go to the right, that's positive x. When I go to the left, that's negative x. When I go up, that's positive y. When I go down, that's negative y. So we need to put all of that together now to start figuring out the sine of some bigger angles. Okay? So let's figure out the sine of 120. First thing you have to do is draw 120. So 120, I start at 0. Which way do I go? Clockwise or counterclockwise? Counterclockwise. So I go to 90, but I've got to go further, right? So 90 plus what would get me to 120? I got to go 30 more. So it's not really, I don't really care about how precise you drew that. So this is the 120 degrees, okay? Puts me in quadrant 2. Now, the next important step you have to do is I have to draw a special right triangle to make this work. Because you don't have in your head how to do the sine of 40 and 41 and 42. That's what your calculator's for. But in your head, I want you to be able to figure out the sine of 30 and 60 and 45. So I'm going to construct a right triangle right here, okay? Now, this angle, okay, someone's got something going off there. We're going to call this angle theta. This angle theta is called either, you'll see it referred to as a reference angle or a central angle, either way. Basically, it's the angle that after you draw the 120, the angle that gets you to the closest x-axis. Okay, so it's the angle with the closest x-axis. So if this is 120, what do you think this angle is? Angle theta. It's 60. Why is it 60? Yeah, if I went all the way to 180, okay, that's 180. So this angle has to be 180 minus 120. So this angle has to be 60 degrees. So this angle right here is 60. If that angle is 60, what's the angle up here? This is 30. This is what kind of triangle? A 30-60 right triangle, okay? So let me clean this up just a little bit. I've got to write a few more things here. So we've got a 30-60, okay? Now, you're going to label the sides. The hypotenuse is always going to be 1. It's a positive number. With a 30-60, the side that's opposite 30 is what? 1/2, okay? Now, to get from this point over to here, in x, did I travel in a negative direction or a positive direction? To get from here to here, I traveled in a negative direction for x, okay? This side here is the square root of 3 over 2, okay? Was this a positive direction for y or a negative direction for y? Positive, okay? So here's where the difference is. When you label this triangle, you're going to have a negative for your x value because you traveled from the origin over here. You went negative in x, positive in y, okay? Now, what they wanted was the sine of 110. What's the definition? So the sine of 110, okay, it's going to be the sine of this angle right here. So the sine of 120 is going to be the sine of that angle theta that we figured out, this 60. So what is the sine? The sine definition is what? Opposite over hypotenuse. So what's the value of the opposite side? What is the sine? What's the opposite of 60? No. The side. Come on, guys. Opposite over hypotenuse. We did this at the very beginning. What's opposite 60? Square root of 3 over 2. What's the hypotenuse? So this is just square root of 3 over 2. Okay? When you look at a 30-60 triangle, whatever is opposite the 30 is 1/2. Okay? The other side is just the square root of 3 over 2. And so in our case, instead of the 30 being down here below, the 60 was down here below. It was rotated. Okay? So the way I always do it is I draw the triangle like we had, and I say, okay, this is 30-60. Go to the 30. Whatever is opposite 30 is 1/2. The other side is square root of 3 over 2. And then you have to pay attention to get from here to here, you have to go negative in the x direction, positive in the y. So I had to stick a negative sign on that x value. Okay? So that tells me that the sine of 120 is square root of 3 over 2. Excuse me. So yeah, what would be the cosine of 120? How would I find the cosine of 120? What's the definition of cosine? Adjacent over hypotenuse. So what's the cosine of 120? You have to look at the triangle to read it. Come on, guys. What's the definition of cosine? Adjacent over hypotenuse. What's the adjacent to this? Negative 1/2 over 1. So the cosine of 120 is what? Come on, guys. Cosine of 120. Cosine of 120, it's going to be the adjacent over the hypotenuse. What's the adjacent? Negative 1/2. Okay? What's the hypotenuse? 1. This is negative 1/2. Okay? I can't go much slower on this, guys, with the triangles. We did this at the very beginning of our unit. You need to be able to look at a triangle and read the trig ratio. Okay? Let's find the value of the cosine of 315. All of these numbers are going to work out to be a 30, a 60, or a 45. That's how you're going to be able to do it without a calculator. So you're looking for any of these to construct that triangle. So to draw a 315-degree angle, I start here. In which direction do I go? I go counterclockwise. A full revolution would be what? 360. So I'm not going to go that far. So I'm going to start here, come somewhere down here. That's 315 degrees. Okay. Then what I will do, I will construct a right triangle. I'm going to construct that right triangle by finding the nearest what? X-axis. Would it be correct to do this? No. Why is that wrong? That's the y-axis. You don't want to do that. You're going to get it wrong. So make sure you construct it with the nearest x-axis. Okay. So there's my right triangle. Okay. So if this is 315, how much further from 315 do I have to go to get to 360? Yeah, 45. So 360 minus 315 is 45. That makes this a 45-degree angle. What is this angle down here? That's 45. This is a special right triangle called a what? 45-45 right triangle. With a 45-45 right triangle, the hypotenuse is 1. Hypotenuse is always 1 in all of these problems. Always positive 1. And then what are the other sides on a 45? It's square root of 2 over 2. Square root of 2 over 2. And now I have to ask myself, so if I travel in this direction, this is what for x? Positive or negative? Positive. If I travel down to here, this is what for y? Positive or negative? It's a negative direction for y. Now I'm ready to tell what is the cosine of 315. So the cosine of 315, what's the definition of cosine? Adjacent over hypotenuse. You look at this angle, what's adjacent? Yeah, square root of 2 over 2. What's the hypotenuse? 1. So this is just square root of 2 over 2. Now I did not ask it, but what would be the sine of 315? What's the definition of sine? Yeah, opposite over hypotenuse. So if I look at this angle, what's the opposite? Yeah, negative square root of 2 over 2 divided by 1. So negative square root of 2 over 2 is the sine of 315. Okay? So all of these, what we're doing, you're drawing the angle, and then you have to use that angle to construct a right triangle, and you read the trig function from there. And all of these triangles are going to either be 30, 60, or 45s. Okay? So let's find the sine and the cosine of 300. So first thing you have to do is to draw the 300. So 300 is somewhere over here. Okay, so that's 300. I need to draw a right triangle out of that. Okay, if this is 300, how much further do I have to go to get to 360? I need to go 60. So this angle right here is 60. If that angle is 60, what is this angle down here? 30. Ding, ding, ding. It's a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. The hypotenuse is always what? 1. The side opposite 30 is what? 1/2. The other side is square root of 3 over 2. This x value, to travel from here to here, is that positive in x or negative in x? Positive in x. What about y? It's negative in y. Okay? So now, the angle theta, which is this reference angle, that's 60 degrees. That's the angle that it makes with the closest x-axis. So what happens is, the sine of 300 is the same as the sine of 60, but I have to adjust it for where it is. It's in the fourth quadrant. So the sine of this angle alpha is going to be, what's the definition of sine? Opposite over hypotenuse. So you look at this angle, what's opposite over hypotenuse? It's a negative square root of 3 over 2 over 1. Okay? And that's just another way of writing that. That is just negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay? What's the definition of cosine? Adjacent over hypotenuse. So go back, it's always this angle right here. What is the value of the adjacent side? 1/2 divided by 1, which is 1/2. Okay? So we've got a few of these. Okay, 150. Where does 150 end? Where's the terminal side? Quadrant what? 2. Okay. So if I draw a 150-degree angle, okay, if that's 150, construct a right triangle down to the x-axis. What is this reference angle theta right here? 30, because it takes 150 and 30 to get to 180. If this is 30, what's the angle up top? 60. All these triangles are going to be 30, 60s or 45s. Okay, this side is 1. What's opposite 30? 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. Now put the positive and negative signs. To start here and to travel, what direction in x? Positive or negative? Negative. What direction in y? Positive. So this angle is 30 degrees. Let's find the secant. Okay, the secant. So remember, the secant is the reciprocal of what? Yeah. So if cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, that means the secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. So what's hypotenuse over adjacent? So it's 1 divided by, what's the adjacent side? No, no, no. I'm looking at this angle. What's the adjacent side? Negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay. And then dividing by the fraction is the same as multiplying by its what? Reciprocal. So this answer is just negative 2 over square root of 3. Let's find the cotangent of this angle. What's the definition of tangent? Opposite over adjacent. That means the definition of cotangent is what? Adjacent over opposite. I'm looking at this 30-degree angle right here. What's the adjacent side? A lot of these trick questions I didn't really expect to be trick questions today. What's the adjacent side to that angle? Negative square root of 3 over 2. What's the opposite side? 1/2. Okay. So this is negative square root of 3 over 2 times 2 over 1. When you divide by a fraction, you're multiplying by its reciprocal. What cancels here? The 2. This answer is what? Negative square root of 3. Okay. So the value of cotangent is negative square root of 3. I'm hoping this just like a little bit of sleepiness after spring break. Okay. It's fairly straightforward in the sense that they all present triangles that are the one of two variations. But you really got to be solid with these trig definitions that we did earlier on. 210 degrees. Where is that going to end up? Yeah, third quadrant. So that means I go to 180, and how much further do I have to go? 180 plus what is 210? 30. So that means that this angle right here is 30. If that's 30, what's the one down here? That's 60. So my central angle or my reference angle is 30 degrees. Okay. So what's the value of this side right here? The hypotenuse is what? 1. What's opposite 30? 1/2. Other side, square root of 3 over 2. Now I take care of the positive and negative. If I start here at the origin, when I went in this direction, was it in a negative x or a positive x direction? It was a negative x. To get down here, was this a negative y or a positive y? Both of these numbers are negative. Now they've asked me for the cosecant. So the cosecant is the reciprocal of what? Sine. So I know that the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That means the cosecant is what? Hypotenuse over opposite. All you have to do at this point, you've done the heavy lifting. Look at this angle. Hypotenuse over opposite. What's the value of the hypotenuse? What's the value of the opposite? Negative 1/2. So this is 1 times negative 2 over 1. Dividing by negative 1/2 is the same as multiplying by negative 2 over 1. This answer is what? Negative 2. The tangent. What's the definition of tangent? Opposite over adjacent. So look at that reference angle, that central angle theta. What's the opposite? Yeah, negative 1/2 divided by what? Negative square root of 3 over 2. So this is negative 1/2 times negative 2 over square root of 3 multiplied by the reciprocal. What cancels here? The 2 and the 2. This is just 1 over square root of 3. You're going to get very similar answers. 1/2 square root of 3 over 2, 2 over square root of 3, 1 over square root of 2. So you're going to get because you're going to have these same two triangles. So you're going to get variations of the same numbers all the way through. So our procedure again, draw the angle, find out where it ends. It ends in one of the quadrants. Use that to construct a special right triangle by going to your nearest x-axis, not your y-axis. That will create for you a central angle theta. That's either going to be 30, 60, or 45. That will tell you, using your special right triangles, how to construct the triangle and how to read any of the trig functions. What I have not done any negatives, so let's do that. Let's just switch this problem to negative 45 degrees, okay? So if this is negative 45 degrees, that means I start and I travel in which direction? Yeah, clockwise. So negative 45, that's going to mean I come right down here, okay? So this is a negative 45 degree angle. So if I go from here to here, and that's negative 45 degrees, what is the central angle here? What is that angle? What's this angle from here to here? That's a 45 degree angle. What's this one? It's 45. This is 1. Square root of 2 over 2. Okay, which one's positive, which one's negative? Yeah, the x is positive, the y is negative, okay? So if I want to figure out the sine is what? Opposite over hypotenuse. So you're looking at this angle right here. It's always the angle with the x-axis. Which side is opposite? Yeah, negative square root of 2 over 2. And what's the hypotenuse? Divided by 1. So this is negative square root of 2 over 2. What's the definition of cosine? Adjacent over hypotenuse. Looking at this angle, what's the adjacent side? Yeah, square root of 2 over 2 divided by 1. So that's just square root of 2 over 2. Okay? Let's switch this next one to be negative as well, just so you've got a couple that do that. Negative 225. Okay? Here's 0. Here's minus 90. Minus 180. Minus 270. Where is negative 225 going to put me? In which quadrant? Second quadrant. So it's going to start here. It's going to come somewhere over here. Okay. So that's where I'm going to end up. So what happens is I'm at negative 180. How much further do I have to go to get to 225? If you're at 180 and you're going to 225, how much further do you have to go? I need to ask it a third time. 45. These answers are all going to be what of three numbers? 30, 60, or 45. The difference between 180 and 225 is 45. So that makes this a 45 degree angle. So that's my central angle theta. If that is 45, that means this is 45. What's the value of the hypotenuse? 1. These two sides are square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. What sign goes on each of these? Yeah, this one is negative because I had to go in a negative direction to get here. That one is positive. What's the definition of tangent? Yeah, so opposite over adjacent. So if you look at this central angle right here, what's the value of the opposite side? Yeah, so it's square root of 2 over 2 divided by what? Negative square root of 2 over 2. What is that? Does anybody know what that is? What's a number divided by itself is what? 1. What happens if you have that same scenario and you got a negative sign? What do you get? Negative 1. This is just That's -1, okay? Now, the next one's pretty easy. What's the definition of cotangent? Adjacent over opposite. So what's the value of the adjacent side? And what's the value of the opposite? So also -1, okay? Now another way to get it, if you know the cosine is -1, if you know the tangent is -1, cotangent is just the reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of -1? It's 1 over that. What's 1 over -1? -1, okay? So a couple more and then we're done. You can take a look at the homework then. So 300 degrees. So what quadrant would that end up in? 1, 2, 3. So 0, 90, 180, 270, 360. Where is 300 going to end up? Quadrant 4, okay? So I come all the way around here. Okay, if that's 300 degrees, construct a right triangle back to the closest x-axis. Okay, there's only one choice there. What is this angle here, this central angle theta? If I go 300, how much further do I go to get to 360? 60. That has to be 60. This has to be 30. All the answers, guys, are going to be 30, 60, or 45. So what's the value of the hypotenuse? 1. How do I then fill out the rest of the sides? What numbers do I, what are the values of the other two sides? It's which one? Okay, so the way I do it, guys, I always just look at the 30 degree. If whatever's opposite 30 is what number? 1/2, okay? And the other one has to be, by process of elimination, square root of 3 over 2, okay? Now you have to put the plus or minus signs. If I'm traveling along this axis, is that positive for x? Yeah. What's the direction for y? Negative, okay? So to find the secant is the reciprocal of what? Yeah. So if the cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, the secant is what? Hypotenuse over adjacent. So my central angle is always this angle right here. If you go and start to use this angle, you're going to get wrong answers. It's always the angle that touches the x-axis. So what's the hypotenuse? Looking at this angle, hypotenuse is always, so we know that's 1. Hypotenuse is 1. What's adjacent to that 60? 1/2. So what's 1 over 1/2? That's 1 times 2 over 1, which is 2. Now, what's the relationship between secant and cosine? They're what? Starts with an R. Reciprocal functions. So if the secant is 2, what do you think the cosine is going to be? What's the reciprocal of 2? 1/2. It should be 1/2. So let's just figure out. The cosine is what? The adjacent over the hypotenuse. What's the adjacent side? So this is just 1/2. Okay? Okay, last one. 405 degrees. Okay? What do we know about this one automatically up front? $405. What kind of angle is that? I don't know why I'm having trouble here. It's more than a full revolution, okay? So 405 degrees means I'm going to go all the way around the circle. So I start here, I go all the way around, After 360, how much further do I have to go to get to 405? 45. Your answer to all of these should be one of what three numbers? 30, 45, or 60, okay? So that tells me that this angle right here, the central angle, is going to be 45 degrees. That makes this top angle 45 degrees, okay? What's the value of the hypotenuse? 1. What's the value of the other two sides? Yeah, square root of 2 over 2. Square root of 2 over 2. Are they both positive or negative or what? They're both positive. So what's the definition of tangent? Yeah, opposite over adjacent. So that's square root of 2 over 2 divided by square root of 2 over 2, which is 1. Okay. What's the definition of cosine? Yeah, adjacent over hypotenuse. And so with this angle, what's the adjacent side? Square root of 2 over 2. It's the same as the opposite. You can see it, but you can see where you get in trouble if you've mixed it up. Sometimes one's positive, one's negative. But here the adjacent is square root of 2 over 2. So it's the square root of 2 over 2 divided by, what's the hypotenuse? 1. So this is just square root of 2 over 2. Okay?